Think you know Vietnam? Forget the documentaries, forget the clean maps with neat arrows, forget the idea that war is won by the side with the best equipment and the loudest radios. Because deep in the triple canopy jungle, where the air is so wet it feels like you're breathing through a cloth, there were men who fought by breaking every civilized rule they'd ever been taught. Men who stopped trying to survive the jungle and started trying to become it. They didn't wash for weeks, they didn't shave, they didn't eat proper rations, they cut pieces off their own gear like surgeons removing cancer. They let the rot crawl into their skin on purpose, not because they were careless, because they were precise, because they understood something the big armies didn't want to admit. In Vietnam, being normal could get you killed faster than being brave. The enemy didn't need satellites to find you. They didn't need radar. They didn't need luck. They had ears, they had eyes, and most of all, they had noses. And if you smelled like soap, you might as well have been carrying a flare. People whispered a name for the Australians who hunted out there, a name that didn't sound like a military designation. It sounded like a warning told by old men at night, the phantoms of the jungle. And the truth about how they earned it is uglier than most people can stomach. Let's open the file. The year was 1967. A Huey helicopter dropped through the humid haze like a steel insect, rotors hammering the air with that familiar, heart-thudding rhythm. It flared over a red dirt clearing and settled hard, dust blooming outward like smoke. The side door slid open, and out stepped Captain William Harrison, United States Army Special Forces, like a walking recruitment poster. His green beret sat perfectly angled. His hair was regulation short. His fatigues were clean enough to belong in a Washington office, pressed with crisp creases that looked almost geometric. His boots were polished to a mirror sheen that had no business existing in a place where the mud could swallow a man whole. And when the jungle wind shifted, it carried something else. Aftershave, soap, that sharp, clean scent of home. It followed him like a flag. Harrison had been sent with an official mission: observe Allied operations, evaluate methods, improve coordination. In plain language, he was there to see what the Australians were doing, and if needed, teach them how professionals handled war. He was confident. He had doctrine. He had discipline. He had the certainty of a superpower behind him, the kind of certainty that makes a man believe the world will bend if he pushes hard enough. Then he saw them. Near a makeshift command tent, lounging on ammo crates like they owned the place, sat a handful of Australian SAS operators. They didn't look like soldiers. They looked like men the jungle had chewed and failed to swallow. Their uniforms were faded to an indefinable green, stained dark with sweat and old grime. Sleeves rolled up unevenly, arms scratched raw by thorn vines, dotted with insect bites, hair overgrown, matted, and the beards, thick, unruly, the kind of facial hair that would get an American chewed out in a hallway within 10 seconds. They were cleaning weapons with slow, casual hands, smoking quietly, laughing like this wasn't a war zone. To Harrison's eye, it was disgraceful. To the jungle's eye, it was camouflage. Harrison didn't know that yet. All he felt was irritation rising in his chest like heat. These were supposed to be elite. This was supposed to be professionalism. Instead, he saw a gang of armed drifters with rifles. He adjusted his straps, took one last breath of humid air, and marched toward them with the stiff posture of a man about to deliver a sermon. And he had no idea he was walking into a classroom where civilization was the first thing that got killed. The man in charge was Captain McGregor. McGregor sat on a sandbag, hunched slightly, whittling at a piece of wood with a darkened combat knife. He didn't stand. He didn't salute. He didn't even look up right away. Harrison stopped 3 paces away and waited, expecting the machinery of protocol to click into place. Nothing. So he cleared his throat. Loud, pointed, a sound designed to snap a man to attention. McGregor finally glanced up. His eyes were old in a way Harrison couldn't explain. Not just tired, not just hardened, old, like something had been taken from him and replaced with patience. He gave the smallest nod, like acknowledging the presence of a bird on a branch. Harrison's jaw tightened. He launched into it. He spoke about standards, hygiene, discipline, morale, efficiency, disease prevention, pride, professional image. He talked about how a soldier who couldn't maintain his uniform couldn't maintain his rifle, and how a soldier who couldn't maintain his rifle would die. It was the kind of speech Harrison had delivered before, the kind of speech that worked on junior officers and recruits, because it was clean and it was simple and it made sense in places where the rules still mattered. McGregor listened without blinking, not defensive, not ashamed, just mildly amused. When Harrison finished, the jungle air hung heavy for a moment. No birdsong, no laughter, only rotors fading in the distance and the slow, oppressive hum of insects. Then McGregor stood. He moved closer, quiet, fluid, like a man who didn't disturb the air when he walked. He stepped into Harrison's space until Harrison could smell him. And it wasn't one smell, it was layers. Stale sweat, damp earth, old smoke. A faint metallic tang that made Harrison's stomach clench, like dried blood that had soaked into fabric and never fully left. McGregor didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Enjoy your shower this morning?" he asked softly. Harrison blinked. "Excuse me?" McGregor's eyes flicked over Harrison's pressed uniform, his polished boots, the faint sheen of clean skin. "Hot water," McGregor continued, almost conversational. "Nice lather, fresh shave, bit of cologne to feel like you're still a man." Harrison started to answer, started to justify, started to explain that standards mattered. McGregor cut him off with a quiet sentence that hit harder than a slap. "I smelled you the moment that helicopter door opened." Harrison froze. McGregor leaned in, voice dropping to something close to a whisper. "That soap of yours? That's not cleanliness out here. That's a beacon." Harrison's pride twitched into confusion. Soap prevents. McGregor's eyes hardened. The Viet Cong don't need to see you. They don't need to hear you. They only need the wind. He gestured vaguely toward the jungle line, where green shadow began and swallowed everything. Jungle's got its own smell, McGregor said. Rot, mud, leaves, water that's been sitting too long. You come in smelling like a barracks bathroom, and you might as well be carrying a sign that says foreigner. He paused. Let it sink in. If I can smell you from 50 yards, he said, almost kindly, they can smell you from 500. Harrison's mouth went dry. He suddenly became aware of his own scent. The aftershave, the toothpaste, the soap, like a bright paint he'd unknowingly smeared across his body. Around them, the other SAS men watched with expressions that weren't mocking exactly. They were pitying, like watching a man walk toward a trap with his eyes open. McGregor's final words landed soft and cruel. You're a walking corpse, Captain. And Harrison's whole world tilted. He had come to teach them professionalism. In under 5 minutes, a dirty, bearded man had taught him the first real law of the jungle. Everything that made him feel civilized made him easier to kill. The humiliation didn't end there. It escalated, because the soap was just the introduction. The real dismantling happened in the prep tent, where the patrol was gearing up for a long-range mission. Harrison arrived with his standard-issue rucksack packed like the manual demanded. Extra socks, canned rations, letters from home, a poncho, spare cloth, the small comforts that made survival feel possible. He slung it up, and before he could settle the straps, a hand like a clamp seized the pack and yanked it down with enough force to nearly topple him. Sergeant Williams, a thick-necked man with forearms like rope and eyes that looked through you like you were an object being measured. Without a single word, Williams took Harrison's pack, flipped it upside down, and shook it until everything spilled out onto the filthy tent floor. Cans clattered, metal on metal. The sound rang in Harrison's skull like a bell. Williams stared at the pile as if it were a corpse. He picked up 2 cans and knocked them together again. Clink. Then he looked at Harrison, slow, disgusted, and said, "That sound will get you buried." Harrison bristled. "It's food." Williams didn't argue. He just held the cans like evidence. "In this bush," he said, "that clink travels farther than your rifle report." He tossed them aside like trash. Then with a stick, he sorted through the rest of Harrison's gear as if it were contaminated. Extra underwear, pushed away. Towel, discarded. Letters, tossed into the reject pile without hesitation. Harrison's anger flared. "Those are personal." Williams' stare shut him up mid-sentence. Then Williams opened his own pack. Harrison expected chaos. Instead, it was a clinic. No cans, no metal clinks. Food stored in soft fabric pouches that made no sound. No towel, no spare uniform, no underwear. Harrison blinked. No underwear. Williams shrugged like the question was childish. Chafes, holds bacteria, gets you raw, gets you slow. Then Williams pulled out something small and held it up between 2 fingers. A toothbrush. Except it wasn't. It was just a bristled head with a tiny stump of handle, sawed off. Harrison stared. "You cut it?" Williams nodded, dead serious. "Wait." Harrison almost laughed because it sounded insane, but Williams' expression didn't change. 5 grams, Williams said. 5 grams every step for days. You carry parasites, you move like a parasite. Harrison looked at their packs again. Leaner, harder, filled not with comfort, but with ammunition, mines, grenades, water, death. They carried nearly 40 kilos of killing power, and they cut toothbrush handles to save weight. It wasn't logistics, it was a philosophy so ruthless it felt religious. Harrison understood something else then, too. These men weren't planning to go into the jungle and come back as men. They were planning to go in and come back as ghosts. Then came the part that made Harrison's stomach turn. The medic explained scent like he was explaining weather, not in a classroom. In the sweaty stink of the tent while flies circled and men checked magazines with calm hands. "The enemy eats rice," the medic said. "Fish sauce, garlic, greens." He looked at Harrison like a teacher addressing the slow student. "You lot eat processed sugar, red meat, dairy, cigarettes. That comes out of you." Harrison frowned. "Comes out." The medic tapped the side of his own neck. "Sweat, pores, breath. Your body announces your diet. Out here you don't just smell like a man, you smell like a foreign factory." Harrison felt his throat tighten. The medic explained how the SAS changed their food before patrols, how they shifted to local staples, dull and cold and foul, not for comfort but for chemistry, not to live well, but to smell right. And then the medic said the sentence Harrison would never forget. "Some rot helps." Harrison stared. "Rot." The medic nodded. "Matter of fact. Fungus, jungle rash, skin breakdown, most troops fight it. We don't always." Harrison's face twisted. "You let it happen?" "We manage it," the medic corrected, "but we don't rush to be clean. The smell of a healthy human is obvious. The smell of the swamp hides you." Harrison swallowed hard. They avoided repellent sometimes. Let insects feed, let leeches latch, let the jungle take its tax. Because chemicals smelled like chemicals, and chemicals didn't belong here. "To hunt a tiger," the medic said quietly, "you can't smell like a man." Harrison felt something cold move through his chest. This wasn't bravery. This was voluntary degradation, a controlled descent. Civilized men choosing to become something primal because it bought them a few seconds of invisibility. And in Vietnam, seconds were the difference between walking out and being carried out. Then Williams moved to Harrison's boots, and Harrison realized the jungle wasn't finished stripping him. The boots were new U.S. Army jungle boots, Panama soles, sharp tread, the pride of American engineering. Williams looked at them like they were an obituary. "Every tracker knows that pattern," Williams said. Harrison started to protest. "Standard issue, regulation, designed for mud." Williams knelt, and with his knife, he began hacking the soles. Chunks of rubber fell away in ugly strips. The clean tread became chaos. Factory symmetry turned into scars. Harrison watched, stunned. "That's government property." Williams didn't look up. "Government property gets you killed," he said, and kept cutting. Then he reached into a bucket and pulled out a handful of sludge, mud mixed with something that smelled like urine and swamp rot. He smeared it into the fresh cuts. Harrison recoiled. "What the hell?" "Fresh rubber smells," Williams said. "Foreign, sharp, like a new tire." He rubbed until the boots smelled like the earth. When Williams stood, Harrison's boots were ruined by regulation standards. But in the eyes of the SAS, they were perfect. Harrison wasn't just losing his soap, his food, his comfort. He was losing his footprint. He was being erased. He had walked in as Captain William Harrison, the polished product of doctrine. And now, piece by piece, he was being turned into something else, a ghost in training. The helicopter insertion into the operational zone was the last loud thing Harrison heard for days. When the chopper lifted away and the jungle swallowed the sound, silence fell like a physical weight. It wasn't peaceful silence, it was predatory silence. The SAS moved like water through foliage, each foot placed with a slow roll that tested for twigs before committing weight. No casual steps, no shifting, no coughing. Even their breathing seemed trained. Harrison tried to mimic them. He felt like a bull in a cathedral. 3 hours passed without a word. Then the point man raised a fist. The patrol froze so instantly it looked unnatural, like someone had switched them off. Harrison crouched behind a teak tree, heart punching his ribs. The sound of his own pulse felt loud enough to alert the entire province. Minutes stretched. Mosquitoes whined at his ears. Sweat ran down his spine, stinging. He dared not wipe it. His legs cramped. He wanted to shift. He couldn't. The Australians around him were statues. They didn't blink. They didn't scratch. They simply disappeared while still being there. And then the nightmare stepped out. A lone Viet Cong scout emerged from bamboo shadows 20 meters away, moving carelessly with his weapon slung and a cigarette on his lip. Harrison's training snapped into place. Target confirmed. Engage. His finger tightened on the trigger, and a hand clamped onto his shoulder. Iron. Williams. The message wasn't spoken, but it screamed into Harrison's bones. "Do not shoot." The scout drifted closer. 12 meters. 10. He stopped. He looked directly toward the brush where Harrison hid. Harrison stopped breathing. This was it. Discovery. Death. The scout adjusted his sandal, squinting. Then he turned and walked on, passing within 8 meters of them. 8 meters. Close enough to touch. Harrison's body trembled with suppressed instinct. Why didn't they kill him? It was easy. It was guaranteed. They waited 30 more minutes after the scout vanished, just in case he wasn't alone. Harrison realized then that his concept of war, fast violence, body counts, aggressive movement, was only one kind of war. This was another. This was war as patience, war as stillness, war as refusing to play the enemy's game, and Harrison hadn't even seen the worst part yet. Later, deeper in enemy territory, Harrison felt the urge to check in with base, to touch the comforting weight of his PRC-25 radio. In American doctrine, communication was life. But the moment his fingers moved toward the handset, Williams's hand shot out and crushed Harrison's wrist through the sleeve. The sergeant's eyes were pure fury. No words, just that look. "Touch it and you'll kill us all." Harrison froze. Williams slowly released him, then pointed subtly upward, as if the air itself was listening. Because it was. The North Vietnamese had direction-finding equipment. Soviet-made, quiet, efficient. Every time an American keyed a mic and said, "check," it wasn't just a signal. It was a flare, a bright electronic shout into the jungle. "Here I am." Harrison's throat tightened. Then he watched the Australians communicate without speaking. A single finger snap, freeze. A thumb rubbed against forefinger, enemy ahead. A slight head tilt, direction change. But it went beyond hand signals. They used the jungle itself. A deliberate twig snap that sounded like a natural branch falling. Regroup. A soft scratching on rifle stock like an insect boring. Danger close. It was a language that hid inside the forest's own voice. Harrison felt like a deaf tourist among telepaths. The Americans were trying to conquer the jungle with technology. The Australians were whispering to it, and the jungle was whispering back. Night came like a blackout curtain. Under the canopy, darkness wasn't dark, it was absolute. You couldn't see your own hand. Harrison expected foxholes, perimeter mines, rotating watches, civilized defense. The SAS did none of it. Digging made noise. Digging left scars. Building a fortress told the enemy exactly where you were. Instead, they laid down where they stood, forming a tight circle. Heads toward the center, feet outward like spokes. No sleeping bags, no mosquito nets, no comfort, just mud, rot, and 5 men, back to back, facing the dark with knives and listening. Harrison felt exposed, like meat waiting for a predator. Minutes crawled. Then the jungle began to feed. Fire ants marched across his neck, bites like needles. He wanted to slap them. He couldn't. Movement meant noise. Noise meant death. Hours passed. The damp cold seeped into his bones. Then something wet dropped onto his eyelid with a soft plop. A leech. It latched just above his lashes. Panic surged like electricity. Harrison's hand twitched toward his face. And William's hand caught his arm in the dark, firm but quiet. No argument. Harrison lay there, rigid, while the leech drank from his eye. Time became torture. pain turned into something else, into a lesson. Survival, he realized, wasn't about resisting the jungle. It was about letting it happen to you and staying silent anyway. When dawn finally softened the darkness into gray-green light, Harrison's face was pale, streaked with dried blood and tears. The man who'd arrived in pressed fatigues and soap-scented confidence was gone. Something colder was waking up in his place, and the jungle still wasn't done teaching. The next morning, the Point Man, an Aboriginal tracker whose eyes read mud like printed text, froze and pointed at the ground. A sandal print, fresh, less than an hour old. Harrison's instincts screamed, pursue, close, engage, but Williams signaled something that made Harrison's brain reject it, retreat. They turned back along their own trail, stepping carefully in their old prints to hide the reversal. 200 meters back, they cut hard at a 90-degree angle into bamboo, then moved parallel to their original path. Then they stopped and waited, facing their own trail. Harrison's heart pounded as understanding arrived like a knife sliding between ribs. They weren't retreating, they were baiting, because one scout meant trackers, and trackers follow tracks with their eyes on the ground, hungry, confident, thinking only of the kill ahead. 40 minutes of silence, then a rustle. 3 Viet Cong soldiers emerged onto the trail, moving quick, eyes locked downward. Harrison saw the lead tracker point to a footprint, his footprint, and grin as if he'd found treasure. He had no idea 5 rifles were trained on his chest from 10 meters away. The ambush was so sudden it felt like an execution. Williams fired first, a short, brutal burst that dropped the lead man before he could blink. The rest of the patrol opened up in the same instant. 5 seconds, 3 bodies, then silence slammed back into place, heavier than before. No cheering, no shouting, no celebration. The Australians checked the bodies, took what mattered, and vanished into green again. Harrison stared at the dead men, chilled by the thought. If they'd pushed forward like American doctrine demanded, those trackers would have been behind them, hunting them, killing them. In this war, retreat could be the attack. The prey could become the predator. And then, a few kilometers later, Harrison saw why their caution wasn't paranoia. It was mathematics. They reached the edge of a major trail, wide, stamped down, a jungle highway, and along it moved a column of North Vietnamese regulars. Not a patrol, an army, dozens became hundreds, AK-47s, RPGs, heavy machine guns, the steady march of men who owned the terrain. Harrison counted 50 in the first minute, then 100, then lost count. A reinforced battalion, close enough that Harrison could see faces, close enough to smell sweat and gun oil. If Harrison had fired at that scout earlier, if they'd lingered after the ambush, if they'd keyed the radio, if one can had clinked, that wave would have crushed them without effort. They lay in mud for 2 hours as the column passed, a river of green uniforms flowing endlessly by. Harrison felt small, not heroic, not powerful, just a fragile animal praying not to be noticed. He finally understood the truth that no briefing in Washington could teach. You couldn't win Vietnam by shouting into the jungle. You survived it by disappearing inside it. When they finally moved again, Harrison moved differently. He placed his feet like a thief. He listened like prey. He accepted the stink, the bites, the hunger, the silence. Because now he understood, those weren't hardships, they were armor. Days later, the extraction helicopter appeared like a miracle against the sky. When Harrison climbed aboard and the jungle fell away beneath him, he realized something unsettling. He was leaving Vietnam, but a part of him would never leave that darkness. Back at base, fluorescent lights felt obscene. Clean uniforms looked wrong. The smell of soap, once comforting, made his stomach tighten. Then came the debrief, not with regular officers, with the CIA. Behind locked steel doors in a smoke-thick room, an analyst slid a map across the table and tapped a sector with a nicotine-stained finger. The enemy avoids this area, the analyst said. Harrison frowned. Because of airstrikes? The analyst shook his head slowly. Because of them. He opened a file stamped with classifications Harrison wasn't supposed to see, and Reed translated intercepts, orders from North Vietnamese commanders telling units to detour, to add days of marching through swamps just to avoid a certain patch of jungle. Not because of bombs, because of fear. The analyst lowered his voice like speaking too loud might summon something. They call the Australians Ma Rung, he said, forest ghosts. Harrison felt cold crawl up his spine. The analyst explained the legend. Men who walked through leaves without sound, who struck without being seen, who left silence behind like a curse. And then came the darker part. Sometimes bodies were left on trails, not as accidents, but as messages. A quiet, brutal psychological knife pressed against morale. Americans tried to win hearts and minds with chocolate and medicine. The Australians won by becoming the thing the enemy feared in the dark. Even the CIA, the analyst admitted, didn't like working too closely with them. Too feral, he said, as if that word could cover it. Harrison sat there, remembering the leech on his eye, the mud in his boots, the smell of rot, the silence so heavy it hurt. Feral wasn't the word. The analyst slid one more piece of paper forward, a ledger, numbers, cold, impossible. For every American lost in that sector, the analyst said, your forces averaged a few enemy KIA, respectable. He tapped another column. For every Australian operator lost, He paused, almost as if the number embarrassed him. Nearly 200 enemy, Harrison stared. 200 to 1. It didn't make sense in a world of artillery and air power and doctrine, but it made brutal sense in the world Harrison had just survived. The difference wasn't weapons, it was philosophy. The Americans fought to conquer the jungle, the Australians fought by becoming it. That night, Harrison sat alone and wrote his report. He didn't write about pride, or morale, or pressed uniforms. He wrote about scent, how soap could be a death sentence. He wrote about silence, how radio chatter could become a beacon. He wrote about the jungle's hunger and the way men had to let it eat them in order to stay alive. And as he signed his name, he understood something that felt like grief. A polished soldier is a beautiful thing, but in Vietnam, beauty was loud, and loud things died. He closed the folder, turned off the lamp, and sat in darkness without fear for the first time. Because now, finally, he was comfortable in the silence that terrified everyone else. In the jungle, civilization wasn't strength, it was a liability. And the phantoms, they didn't win by being better men. They won by giving up the part that needed to be human.